Hi, welcome back. My name is B.A. Sparks, also known as Carrion Crows, and we're going to cover ballistic and energy balancing in one of my favorite games, MechWarrior Online. First off, props to PGA for making one hell of a game. This is hands down the best MechWarrior game created and really does do it justice. The purpose of this feedback and video as various solutions to MWO is never to condemn PGI, but rather to give them perspective on why I think these issues need to be balanced. Okie doke. Secondly, I got some good responses from the first video and the BattleTech Balance video. You can find the link down below and some great discussion on there on both on my points and to clarify and expand upon those features. If you haven't seen it yet, I recommend taking a gander. Okay, in this video we're going to cover a variety of things, and because my nitpicks with the energy and ballistic side of things were so small, I went ahead and mashed them together. So here's what we're going to go ahead and cover. Machine guns, flamers, AC-2s, AC-10s, LB-10X, ER-PPCs, pulse lasers, and small lasers. Not a huge list, but believe it or not, most of these changes are very minimal. So first up, in the most controversial points, yep, that's right, it's machine guns. This topic isn't the most controversial point, it's definitely one of the more popular ones for lots of people entrenched on both sides. First off, a few points, a little bit of the history and lore behind it. A BattleTech machine gun weighs 1,000 pounds, exactly half a ton. When BattleTech was created, it was created as a battle mech versus battle mech game. There were no infantry in it. The machine gun did indeed do 2 points of damage, just at very short ranges. Some of the more keen people may realize that's exactly the same damage as an AC-2. It was only later when the BattleTech universe expanded that they gave machine guns bonuses in the form of killing infantry. And even then, not even a bonus to damage, you just rolled a d6 and that's how many infantry you gunned down. Now the machine gun and the autocannon are very similar. They both fire heap rounds, or high explosive armor piercing rounds. This means that the bullet penetrates the armor and explodes. The penetration may be very limited, but the resulting explosion ends up cratering the armor and blowing off chunks. And as more heap rounds are fired, the process is rinse, wash, and repeated, resulting in armor that is very capable of shredding high-density battle mech armor. What does this mean in game terms? It means that the machine gun should be doing a hell of a lot more damage than it already does. Let me throw some numbers at you. Here's what I think the machine gun should be doing. The machine gun should be doing 0.2 damage a round, have a rate of fire of 10 rounds a second, and have a range of 0 to 90 meters for the full 0.2 damage a round, and from 90 meters to 200 meters, your damage drops down to 0.1 damage a round. Ammo, 200 rounds of ammo for a half a ton, and 400 rounds of ammo for a full ton. Yes, machine guns should be able to equip ammo in half-ton increments. However, the half-ton ammo still takes up 1 slot per instance. Let's throw some more numbers at you. This makes the machine gun a 2 DPS weapon, exactly half the DPS of an AC-2, which is 4. The damage per ton of ammo is down to 80 damage per ton of ammo. The average damage per ton in the regular ton of ammo is 150, with the AC-20 being the odd duck with 140 due to the way the numbers worked out. You have 40 seconds of operation at full DPS for a full ton of ammo, and 20 seconds for a half a ton of ammo. Alternatively, the combat time for the AC-20 is 28 seconds, 37.5 for the AC-10, 45 seconds for the AC-5, and lastly 37.2 for the AC-2. So having a full combat time of 40 seconds is not completely out of the realm there. So it fits right in. Which mainly makes it like any true ballistic weapon in this game, is if you want a reasonable amount of ammo, you're going to have to invest some more tonnage. Somewhere along the lines of 2 to 3 more tons of ammo per gun if you want to last the whole match. Suddenly the machine gun is no longer a 0.5 ton weapon when it requires 2 to 3 tons of ammo to last the match. Now it's a 3.5 ton weapon, takes up 4 slots, and has a downslide of explosive ammo. But let's get back to the 2 DPS. A lot of people tend to freak out when they hear 2 DPS. That's absurd, they say, when a medium laser only has a DPS of 1.25. Here's the thing with the machine gun. It requires 100% uptime. It means that to do that full 2 damage over the course of 1 second, you need to have 100% accuracy and stay within 90 meters of your target for the full duration. Medium laser deals 5 damage over 1 second and has a cooldown of 3 seconds at 270 meters. The machine gun would have to stay on target 100% of the time and within 90 meters for a total of 2.5 seconds to equal that 5 damage. The machine gun illustrates here is a raw and efficient DPS dump. It requires you both to be point blank and have excellent accuracy to get the full benefit, which is incredibly risky on the user's part and really is the point blank last ditch weapon, as it should be. The reason the machine gun needs buffed? Simple. We need a low-weight ballistic option. Now, if PGI implements one of my suggestions and gives mechs 20% more internal structure for having standard structure, I covered that in the last episode, there would be a reason to have seeking weapons, for killing equipment in that location, so on and such as. But even then, the need for an actual weapon for lights in the ballistic category is so much more important than the gimmicky side effect of criticals on locations. Could this weapon be abused? I don't really see how. And two, I kind of hope so. The thing with enough slots to really stack on the machine guns would be the Jaeger Double D with its 6 ballistic options. And with the above machine gun, at the very minimum, it required him to use 9 tons. 3 tons for the 6 machine guns and 6 tons for the ammo, which gives him 40 seconds of fight for a whopping 12 slots. My guess, he'd probably have to pack more ammo for all that just to hold a measly 12 DPS. Now the UAC-5 weighs 9 tons and does 9.09 DPS at about 6 times the range. If people are willing to get within 90-meter knife range and use a weapon that is that ammo intensive, I'm all for that. Yes, they should be rewarded if they successfully pull it off. Does this mean that he's going to automatically murder everything he gets his hands on? Hell no. Look at the good old AC2. Lots of people packing 4, 5, or even 6 of those bad boys for 16, 20, and 24 DPS variants. Most of those people would agree that they can be good in certain situations, but they don't straight up murder people. And the reason for that is very simple. People move, people turn, they turn their torso, they take damage in different locations. I mean, the DPS sounds good, but MechWarrior Online isn't necessarily a DPS game. There's a lot more to it. There's cover, there's movement, there's popping it out, there's getting line of sight. So even though you may have amazing DPS, it doesn't mean you'll be able to apply it 100% of the time. Now, the machine gun needs to deal enough damage to be viable for light mechs. The Spider 5K needs to be effective. Try as I might, I still can't find PGI's mythical 6MG Spider floating around out there. With the Spider 5K and the Cicada 3C, you have 4 ballistic options that need lots of love. Now, lots of people seem to be concerned what happens when a mech with 4 M guns gets behind a bigger, slower mech and unloads. Well, typically the same thing that happens when a light mech loaded with 4 to 6 medium laser gets behind a mech. It starts to kill it. Unless the guy gets cored from behind and is a complete knob, he's not going to stand there and take it. And the medium lasers are the much better option because they do more damage in a shorter amount of time. This is because, the guy's going to notice he's getting fired on and turn. Whereas the machine guns, even though they might do better DPS in the long term, they have to be on target 100%. So let me go ahead and clarify points in the forum. We'll deal with that later, but let's move on to the AC2. Now, a small balance suggestion and feedback here is to increase the AC2 range from 720 meters to 810 meters. A while back, PGI did a fantastic job of bringing the AC5 up to par by both lowering the cycle time and increasing the range. Great job. But this leaves the AC5 a little too close to the AC2, with only 100 some odd meters separating them before damage fall off. I would like to increase the range of the AC2 out to 810 meters to compete with the ERPPC. Everything else about the AC2 is solid. Next up, the AC10. The AC10 has always been sort of a problem child, as it is easily compared to the PPC and ERPPC, but weighs a lot more and takes up a lot more space. I'd like to give it the same treatment as the AC2 and the 5 and just give it a bit more range. Push it out to 520 meters. The reason for this is in part to deal with the balance in the weapons on its own, but it's also because on a lot of maps, the most common engagement windows for fights are in between cover is between like 480 and 500 meters. Now, if you go out on any particular maps and you take a look at your favorite cover spots in between, you'll find that they're just outside of that AC-10 effective range. And this leaves the AC-10 in quite a pickle. Though it looks good on paper, most engagements happen just outside of that AT-10's full effective damage range, which in part is why it feels like the weapon isn't up to par, because most of the time you're not hitting for the full amount of damage. And that is a lot of weight to invest for something not doing full damage. Alternatively, let's deal with the AC-10's twin brother, the LB-10X. And in the tabletop rules was clearly the superior weapon to the AC-10. To really make the LB-10X competitive, you would have to really start tightening down on the choke, giving it a smaller and smaller spread to make it viable. Eventually, you'll get to the point where we just replace the AC-10 altogether. I'm not a fan of this option because, as machine guns, I should tell you I'm a firm believer in every weapon should be viable. And the LB-10X is no exception. Instead of playing around with the damage, I would simply like to lower the cycle time of the LB-10X to 2.1 seconds. The AC-10 has a cycle time of 2.5 seconds with a 520 effective meter range, and the LB-10X would have a 2.1 cycle time with 540 effective range. This would regulate the LB-10X to more of a DPS and a brawling weapon. It would fire faster and cycle faster than the AC-10, but the downside is it spreads its pellets, meaning that you are pumping out more DPS, but not necessarily doing more precision damage to the intended location. The AC-10 would still be the marksman/precision weapon, but the LB-10X would be the brute force approach. I wanted to talk about artillery in this next section, but decided to push it back to the missile and electronic warfare section I am making next. This is simply because I want to keep all the same topics grouped together for ease of convenience. Next up, let's talk about energy weapons. The Flamer. The Flamer, just like the machine gun, is one of those weapons that are kind of forgotten, really, by most people, and they're just kind of apathetic to the whole Flamer issue. Doesn't do anything, isn't worth the wait, and almost impossible to buff without becoming massively overpowered. Good news. It's easy to buff and make balanced. It always has been. So here's how we're going to do it. Simple. Make it a 2 DPS weapon just like the machine gun. Make it cost 2.5 heat a second to enemy mech and 3 heat a second to you. Here's the kicker. The Flamer itself will be treated just like jump jets in that it has an energy bar and that can be exhausted. For instance, the Flamer would have 5 seconds of fire, but you have to wait 10 seconds to build up full pressure again. So you can use the Flamer as much as you want so long as you got juice for it, just like jump jets. But you have to allow the time for the juice to recharge back up to pressure if you want to use it for longer durations. Thus, you'd have a very intense, solid DPS weapon that can't be abused. Now, PGI has implemented a rule that you can only raise a target mech's heat to 90%. I agree with this. I know it's a smart move on their part, but right now the Flamer's worthless, and it's worse than worthless. It's a high heat weapon that does 0 damage. The above cures all that. It turns the Flamer into a good DPS weapon for 1 ton, causing an exceptional amount of heat on your target and yourself. However, it's not sustainable, as each Flamer only has its own pressure tank/juice that allows it to be fired for 5 seconds at full auto. Then you have to let it cool down and recharge. Now, a smart person might say, why can't I take 3 Flamers on my mech and then just cycle them to always keep a Flamer on them? Hey, go for it. Each Flamer generates about 3 heat per second. That's equal to almost an ERPPC, only to deal 2 DPS a second for 3 tons. If you can afford the heat, by all means, go for it. So what happens now is the Flamer shifts from being a weapon that you have to spam in insane numbers and insane amount of time to a short burst weapon that is functional as long as it has juice. So you would consider using it on a heavy energy mech to limit their DPS at the cost of your own heat. But the effect is temporary, can't be sustained, and you are still bouncing off that 90% heat cap. But at the very least, the Flamer becomes useful in terms of damage, function, and is a situational weapon, but still a viable one. Because the Flamer is so short-ranged, it needs to have that 2 DPS. It needs to cost that 2.5 heat. It needs to be usable and functional for a 1-ton weapon. Next up, small lasers need their range adjusted to 120 meters. Not much else to say here, other than the fact they need that extra 30 meters. Trying to hit people for the duration of that beam within that whole 90-meter range is really tough. Well, now on to the good stuff. Pulse lasers in general. Pulse lasers have always been a point of contention at MWO. It's hard to stick to the tabletop rules and integrate it in MWO's world. The pulse lasers kind of flopped in that whole translation. In the tabletop, the big deal about pulse lasers is they provided a +2 hit bonus on attack rolls, so it was worth the shorter range, the weight, the higher heat, and for a little bit more damage. In MWO, we just get a weapon that does a wee bit more damage for more weight, a lot less range, and what feels like a lot more heat. Even trying to run 4 medium pulse lasers is a job for 22 heat sinks in MWO. What I'd like to do for pulse lasers is rather give them back that +2 hit bonus. And here's how we do it. Let's take medium pulse lasers. Let's take a medium pulse laser. It deals 6 damage over the course of 0.75 seconds. Now let's divide that up into 3 bits, each one being 0.25 a second. Normally, the pulse laser would deal 2 damage each of those 0.25 seconds that add up to 0.75 seconds total, for a total of 6 damage. My idea is to break up that even distributed damage and instead deal the bulk of that damage in the middle. So my idea for pulse lasers, we'd once again be using the medium pulse laser as an example for this, but the first 0.25 seconds, it would deal 1 damage. The middle 0.25 seconds would deal 4 damage, and the last would deal 1 damage. Now, it still takes the same amount of time to unload the pulse laser, and the medium pulse laser still does 6 damage, but the way it deals damage is much more potent, in my opinion, simulates the +2 modifier that would have gotten in tabletop. This allows a person to fire the weapon, giving them 0.25 seconds to correct their aim, and then hit the target or even the targeted location for the bulk of the damage in the middle part, tapering off to the final 1 damage. Even though we haven't changed the heat, the range, or even really fooled around with the damage, except for small pulse lasers, they kind of need an increase to 3.5 damage. But the pulse lasers in general start acting like a mini high-intensity autocannon now. Provided you can ensure that beam is on target for the middle duration of the beam, you'll be doing 2/3 of the damage in a short burst. Now what this means is it turns your pulse lasers into the quintessential hit-and-run weapon. It gives you a little bit of buffer zone in the middle before you deal the bulk of the damage and then slowly tapers off. And this, in my opinion, would make pulse lasers well worth it. Next up, let's go ahead and deal with the ERPPC. Now, ERPPC is kind of been a bit of a mystery to me here. And I'm not going to suggest we tinker with the heat or the cycle time or the damage. PGI has done an excellent job so far dealing with this weapon and deserves respect. My tinker deals with something that's bothered me since the dawn of the tabletop. And truthfully, it doesn't make much sense to me. The ugly problem here is that the ERPPC has no minimum range. I cannot for the life of me fathom why the PPC has a minimum range, yet the ERPPC, which is longer ranged, has no minimum range. Even when I played tabletop, I considered this a gross oversight on the designer's part. It just doesn't make any sense. Well, in MWO, it is making even less sense. And as if you didn't know where I was going with this, my suggestion for the ERPPC is to add a minimum range just like the regular PPC. Don't get me wrong, I'm all about tabletop. Love it. All my suggestions are built around tabletop with that in mind, except when tabletop blatantly doesn't make sense and has serious balancing issues. The ERPPC not having a minimum range doesn't make sense, and it is a serious balancing issue. Now here's the upside to give an ERPPC a minimum range. You'll see your return to some brawling mentality. It will be a legit tactic for mechs to attempt to close on a poison mech to get under that ERPPC or PPC's gun, so to speak. Now what you'll see is a shift in the meta towards a more balanced build. Does this mean you'll see Highlanders with Gauss rifles and 3 ERPPCs? Probably, but what you'll see is a small shift towards Highlanders running maybe a Gauss rifle, 2 ERPPCs, backed up by some SRMs or streaks for personal defense when targets try to get under their guns. Now there will be a reason to take multi-tiered weapons effective at all ranges. No longer will the ERPPC be the be-all, end-all of all one-stop shopping. It's just not going to work anymore. And honestly, it's a long time coming. Having one weapon that has accomplished it the longest of ranges and the shortest of ranges just really wasn't working for me. And if we're really being honest with ourselves, it just needs to happen. So those of you expecting me to jump on the Gauss rifle in the same way, you're kind of sorely mistaken. The Gauss rifle pays for its range, utility, and weight, low hit points, and it can explode, possibly taking your mech with it. And this concludes my energy and ballistic balancing. However, there's one small note I wanted to make that I totally forgot to include in my battle mech balancing. That is, case equipment. Case equipment should be changed so the location may never be destroyed due to ammo explosion. The ammo explosion may reduce the location to 1 hit point or 10% structural hit points, but at the very least it should prevent the location from being destroyed due to ammo explosion. Thus, it has a purpose. It's worth taking. And all those case equipments included with the XL engine now make sense. Once again, feedback is encouraged and welcome. Special thanks to Gilfner for mixing the sound. Stay tuned for next week when I get into missile, artillery, and electronic warfare. I'm going to blow your mind. In a good way. Stay frosty.